Hello, friends. Hello, hello. Hello, gang. Hey, Vicky. Good morning, Karen. Hope you're getting ready for a great Thanksgiving. Hi, Bonnie. Are you doing well? Hello, friends. Hello, hello. Bob Guinan, everybody. Hey, Bob. Hi, Jane. We will. So, good morning, Yvette. Hello, hello. How is everybody? We are doing the coat drive here with the United Way. They're doing the logistics of boxes all over. So if you see, and we're provide, so if you see boxes out for coats to be donated to the Fall River area, that we're a part of that because we're helping out with volunteers and with space. So they're coming and gathering and sorting coats and then sending them on their way. So we're a big part of that. We're kind of the big sorting station here. So and we just got a big charge of coats from Somerset Christian Congregational Church, Reverend Cheryl over there. So much blessings to her. It really is. They have a great. They've just are going to be an incredible blessing to people all over the city that are keeping warm in this season. So that is a wonder for us and a blessing to be thankful for sure. How are you? Good morning, everybody. Hello, hello, everyone. How are you? So, as we're getting ready to get going this morning, I also want to ask. We are a community of prayer, and Jane shared with me her husband Jonathan is in need of prayers for healing. So we ask that if you feel to pray this day, offer Jonathan some prayers for healing and grace in this hour. So Jane, we are holding him up, and you and through this journey. So peace and grace. Good morning, Jamie. Happy Thanksgiving. Donna, good morning to you. Glad you're here. So good to see everyone. How are you? Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. All right. Let's get going this morning. It is the 24th day of November. We are on Thanksgiving week here at 11:11, and I'm glad you're with us. I'm glad you're a part of this journey. I'm in fact thankful you're here. See what I did there? Uh, Many of you know that I'm a sailor, and we have a sailboat. We actually lived on our boat for a number of years, so in my the name of my boat is it always kind of brings a little consternation to people because sometimes I get questions, but the name of my sailboat is Divine Providence. That's the name of the boat. So, and it is that because I really believe this notion of providence the way the pilgrims believed in the notion of providence. You see, we're talking about pilgrims, we're talking about Thanksgiving this week, and so I wanted to, that part of what this incredible journey has been for the pilgrims and for their journeying, uh, and the way that they kind of understood everything that they moved to the world was this high sense of God's providence. And a good example of it, and it comes out of how they might seek to understand the world, and I think is still one of the most brilliant ways to understand the world, quite honestly, is this notion of deep divine providence. That meaning that God's hand and God's operation are in the things that are happening in the world, and that and this is hard, particularly in a world where we confront violence, and sometimes when we confront senseless violence, it's hard. I mean, particularly that breaks the peace of God, that breaks the great shalom. Like that's a huge one, because it changes everything. A moment of violence or a moment of sickness, and everything changes. And to think that God's providence, God's ordering of the universe is in that somehow, and that God has that, is can be hard, and it can be difficult. In our Bible study, we're doing the book of James, and there's this great example of what, as we're talking about in this, and I know I've been picking it out a little bit, but it's so important. And this is, and it's at the heart of what the early pilgrims understood when they understood how God worked in the world. And it was different than other people. Other people saw God kind of as a, maybe a little more deist kind of way, that he kind of wound the universe up like a big spring and a big toy, and it was just playing itself out, or that there were these incredible corrupt forces on the world which were battling, and that's certainly true, but that the battle was a lot tighter than the idea of that God's provision would continue and always be at work in front of that battle, or amidst those devils and demons, and this was the way of the early separatists. This was the way of those Englishmen who came ashore in 1620, and whose 400th year of Thanksgiving holiday that we are celebrating this week. And so this is from the book of James, and just a good example of how the worldview, of what worldview we're invited into when we're invited into the pilgrim's worldview. And James says this: "Now listen, you say today or tomorrow I'm going to go to the city and I'm going to spend a year there carrying on business and making money. Why, you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then it vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we live and do this or that. As it is, you boast of your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them." That this invitation into God's divine providence, this meaning that there is a way that God's laying out in any given moment. There's a best case. There's a beauty case. There's a case for beauty. There's a case for something high and wonderful and good to come out of each moment. And it may not be all that high or all that wonderful depending on what's happening in that moment, but that there is a way, there's a providence, and there's a work that God is conspiring for in the midst of it all, for you and for me and for each one of us, that we're being conspired for, that the Lord's providence, the Lord kind of laid this game board out for us in such a way that we might win it, and that this is at the center of what the pilgrims that come over on the Mayflower are about. They believe deeply in this, and they encounter it again and again and again. I mean, that's the funny thing. So when they get off the ship, they get off the Mayflower. They spend some time in what's now Provincetown, and then they find their way to this cleared spot. Not just a cleared spot, but a cleared spot that has corn planted on it. And not just a clear spot that has corn planted on it, because remember, everything's forested. Like if you're going to build a house, you've got to clear the land. That's most of the work of actually building a house, is to clear the land. They find this cleared place that has corn already growing on it, and on that corn, and in that place there's actually a great source of fresh water, which is not easy to come by. It's as if this place was prepared for them. Now, what had happened a few years before is that they ended up that there had been a Wampanoag tribe there, and that they had become sick with disease, and so that they actually became so sick that so many people died that their group kind of withered down to a small group, and they ended up kind of joining another group or leaving that site. So here was this place that was absolutely prepared for settlement, and the Pilgrims go 3,000 miles. Who were supposed to be? Where were they supposed to be? Virginia. Remember, they were bound for Virginia. Well, Virginia is not Cape Cod. Virginia is not Plymouth, Massachusetts. Not only did they stumble into the wrong state, not only did they stumble into the wrong state by a lot of states, but they stumble into the wrong state in the wrong place at the wrong time of year, stumbling into exactly a place that's prepared for them. Exactly a place that's ready. This was not lost on them. This was not, they didn't look at that and say, "Oh, aren't we lucky?" Like they weren't prescribing this to chance or to fortune as the Romans might have, or as the others might have. They prescribed this to just the way James is talking about it, to say, this is the Lord's will. The Lord provided for us. The Lord's provision was in this movement and in this moment. And our job is to receive it and to be grateful. That was our job, as the Pilgrims had said. And this notion of providence, this notion that there's a way provided for you, that there's a way, that there's a world conspiring for you, and that in order to open that world, in order to unzip the Ziploc of all the good stuff inside that we can see through the clear bag, the task of that one of the core disciplines of doing that is thankfulness, is thanksgiving, is giving thanks. That's why this whole notion of providence, and it's not like the more thankful I am, the more God blesses me necessarily, but the more thankful I am, the more I open to the very atmosphere of heaven, to the way in which, to the goodness and grace that is open and aware and offered. Like that's the power of this thing. That they were Calvinists in this way of God's providence governs all, which is a quote from Calvin, and that they're in the middle of this as a bunch of visible saints. You know, this meal that we're going to celebrate tomorrow, that was kind of laid down 400 years ago. You know, we do want well to remember who it was. There's 50 pilgrims. But remember, of those 50 pilgrims, only 25 of them, only half of them, were actually confessing Christians. Those were actually the visible saints, as they called themselves. The others were strangers. Which was the word for those that were not a part of the covenant. So it was just about half and half. 25 people. And then Massasoit shows up with 90 folks from his tribe, and they have this storied meal. And all of it comes from this sense of deep, deep belief in providence. That they were being placed there, that they were being conspired for, and that their job was to express profound gratitude for this. And friends, I don't pretend to know your theology, to pretend to know what it is you think about the world. But I for one, believe the Pilgrims had it right. I, for one, believe that they had this rhythm of gratitude. They managed to come into not just the rhythm of gratitude of the daily of the yearly feast, but the rhythm of gratitude day in and day out for this way in which we're provided for the way in which God's providence unfolds, even in the hard days. They were giving thanks and gratitude even through the midst of their famine, and even to the midst of their struggle, even to the midst of they took to burying their dead at night because they were afraid that if there were hostile natives nearby, they would see how weakened their forces had become, and so they took to burying their dead at night because they didn't want to give off the idea of how diminished their numbers were. This was before they had made real friends with the Wampanoag. This notion of living in providence, and that is the invitation to living in gratitude. Like, that's what it is, because it's this notion of living into the idea that it is that welcomes in the very air of heaven, that welcomes in the very goodness and grace of peace. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great German theologian who would go on to be martyred in the church, he would say, in ordinary life, we hardly realize that we receive a great deal more than we give, and that it is only with gratitude that life becomes rich. This is a guy who would go to his death fighting the Nazis and caring for his brothers and sisters in the concentration camps. How rich that life becomes in gratitude. And it becomes rich in gratitude because we realize the way things are ordered are way beyond us. The way that we are provided for is way beyond us. It's so much bigger than we are, and so much more real and deep and wide that none of it is really ours to direct. As it says in the book of James, instead you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this and do that. Friends, we're getting ready to celebrate the meal tomorrow. We're going to have our Thanksgiving service tonight, and that we are going to have the opportunity to gather and declare as we gather. It will also be live streamed on Facebook Live as well, if you want to join us there. To be able to gather and worship on the eve of Thanksgiving. And that in that gathering, we come to recognize the providence of God. That this is not, that what is taking place in this world, although there may be chaos at work, that chaos is never devoid of God's providence and God's operation in it. And in fact, even the chaos is controlled by the very providence of God. Even the chaos is utilized to bring blessing and goodness into this world. We might not know how, we might not know where, we might not know even the most horrible of things, even the most difficult and painful of evil things have in them the seeds of God's operation for goodness to come into this world. And don't hear me say everything that happens is good. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that 25 faithful people landing on a shore 401 years ago that would come to, or 400 years ago, that would break bread with Native Americans in their midst and with separatists around them, those 25 people would come to change the world in their continued leaning into the trusting of God. Did they do it all right? No. Were they perfect? No. Are we? No. None of that has anything to do with it, because it's not our perfection that we're leaning into. It is God's ability to take the brokenness and the weirdness and the strangeness and the awfulness of this world and make it something beautiful and good and right. So it's my hope you'll gather with us a bit. It's my hope you will hear this the joys of stepping into the pilgrimage of our lives, the joys of knowing the way in which God provided for those people. And if you read that story, if you ever really sit down and read the best accounts we have of the pilgrim's journey, you cannot but agree with them. The way in which God's hand provides for them every single step of the way. There's no good reason they make it. None. Now you can attribute that to anything you like, but it is my experience of living, and I think if we're honest, that understanding that Bonhoeffer has of life, that there's so much more we are given than we receive, and that is conspired for us than is conspired against us. And that, in the words of Edward Winslow, the leader of one of the leaders of the Pilgrims, the good hand of God was God's good providence that we found corn, for else we know not how we should have done. Friends, I don't know what your corn is this season. I don't know what your welcome is this season. I don't know what your wonder is this season. That seems bare, but what your provision is in this season. But what I know is there is one. I know that the Lord's providence, the divine providence, is carrying you someplace, is taking you on a journey. It's caring for you every step of the way. It is providing for you in ways that you don't even know and you can't even imagine. My hope is that you'll hear the words of James. My hope is that you'll take courage from the pilgrim ancestors. My hope is that you will live into this in the fullness of thanksgiving. That key that unlocks the seeing and the understanding and the rejoicing in the Lord's providence. It's not that these things aren't happening. It's that when we give thanks for them, that we open ourselves to the very air of heaven, to the very atmosphere, to the very goodness that surrounds the Lord's provision for us. It's said there are two ways out of the valley of death. There are two paths, as the ancients say, out of the valley of death. One is the path of resentment. The other is the path of gratitude. It's my hope that if you're whatever death, whatever difficulty you're encountering in these days, that you seek the path of the Lord's providence, that you seek the path of gratitude, and that in it all good things may come to you, and that you may find the ripeness of your provision already set for you as you encounter the new shore of your being. All right, friends, that's my hope for you. I'm going to do a little check-in tomorrow. I anticipate doing it a little check-in 11:11. I'm hoping this, but it won't be long. But we'll just say hi and wish one another Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. It's a little tradition we've done over these years, and it'll be fun. So we'll do that, and it is great to be with each of you today. I am thankful that you are on this journey. Join us tonight here on Facebook Live or 282 Rock Street right here in Fall River. Come down and join us in worship as we gather for a short while to mark this high holiday of Thanksgiving in America. Peace and grace, my friends. We'll pick it up tomorrow with another 11:11.